Hi there. Welcome to New Tracks Modeling. New Tracks is an exciting new digital opportunity to obtain mentoring to help you improve your modeling. You will meet talented modelers and manufacturers from all over the world who share their model building skills and artistic advice. Improve your modeling and increase the confidence in your modeling efforts. Share your building efforts with fellow modelers and have some fun doing it. The shows are live on Zoom and YouTube, so be sure to join in and ask your questions. Now here is New Tracks founder and your host, Jim Kello, MMR.
Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Hope that you enjoy the show. We think that it's going to be a very exciting one for you and something that you're not going to want to miss. This is where mentors help modelers build. We're all about trying to get more people building more models. We think that that is a major part of the future of our hobby. And because you're here tonight, obviously, you believe in that too. Before we start our show, I'd like to have Father Ron Walters lead us in a short prayer.
Creator of the world, as modelers and makers, we recognize the intricacy and the beauty of our world. We thank you for the vision and the artistry you have given us. Continue to bless us with your creative spirit. Amen.
Thank you so much, Father Ron. We really do appreciate everything that you do for our show. Next, I'd like to talk to you a minute about the new series that we started every 2 weeks on Thursday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. This one you can't watch on Zoom. The only way that you can watch it live is on our YouTube channel, New Tracks Modeling. And what this is all about, you all may have heard somebody called John Allen, and how much a lot of us wish that we had taken the time to visit John when he was alive and be able to talk to him and hear what his views about the hobby are firsthand and see his mannerism and maybe even meet some of his friends. Now, you may have heard of a guy by the name of Frank Ellison. Back in the time period, way back, sometime between 1934 and 1956, Frank was known as the face of model railroading. Frank was an Oatesdale. Lived in New Orleans, Louisiana. From everything that I've heard about him, he was just a fantastic man to meet and talk with. I happened to have the opportunity to meet both of those people, and I never did. I was young, and too many other things in my life took first place, and so I passed that opportunity by. I've always regretted it. Well, that regret is why I decided to start Modeling Lifestyle. Because I think that the people that are alive today in this part of the 21st century need to be remembered. Not just by an article that they write or somebody's memory of them, but we just need to be able to see what they look like, how they move, what they do with their hands, what they modeled, how they modeled, who their friends were. I think all that's important for the hobby and for the future of model railroading. And that's why we're doing that series. It's every 2 weeks. The next one comes up on November the 17th. And we have a fantastic modeler. Again, he's an OM30 modeler, Al Judy. And Al is just one terrific guy.
Join the Modeling Lifestyle at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on November 17th, where we will feature the modeling lifestyle of Al Judy. Al is an amazing modeler, focusing on ON30 scratch building, weathering, and seams.
I love the sound of a whistle.
Again, you can only see it on our YouTube channel, New Tracks Modeling. I hope that you'll be able to take some time and join us for that show, because it's going to really be a good one and it's going to be really enjoyable. particularly to meet some of the friends that Al has invited to join him on the show. I want to mention too, next week, we have our monthly hobby shop segment with Mark. And you know, this is something that I'm really excited about. The association is sponsoring it for us, and Mark did a great job on the first one. And I think as we start finding out about the model railroad hobby shops that are left in the country and what they're trying to accomplish and the problems that they're running into, and recognize that a lot of those problems are the same problems modelers have, then there ought to be a way that we can get together with those hobby shop owners and work together to try to improve our hobby. At least I hope so. And we've also got Jeffrey Jordan coming back. You may remember Jeffrey was on one of our My Bills segments a while ago and made a comment about converting an 8-pane window in plastic to a 4-pane window. And I asked him at that point, he kept saying, well, you know, it's easy to do, just take your time, it's easy to do. And at one point I said, well, Jeffrey, how do you do it? And it probably took him 10 minutes to try to explain how he went about doing that. Well, he's going to come back next week and actually show us step by step what he has to go through in order to convert that 8-pane window to a 4-pane window in plastic. And then next week, we're going to be talking about traction and what traction modeling is all about today. And we've got 4 great modelers that are going to be talking about it with us and trying to improve the knowledge about what is involved in a traction hobby. The good things about it, the bad things about it, who's involved in it, what's happening to the clubs around the country. All of that we're going to try to cover for you. So I hope that you'll be interested to come back next week and see that show. We also have an update on our finances that I'd like to go over with you briefly. As you know, we have a Patreon account that we hope that you'll consider contributing to. It's called New Tracks Modeling, in order to help us defer the cost of paying for these shows, the out-of-pocket cost, not the personnel cost or anything like that, and also cover the cost for our scholarship. All in all, to try to pay for the actual cost for getting the 501c3 that we're trying to work on now, and for the first year scholarship that we're trying to get off the ground of $1,000. We have covered about $700 of that cost so far. What I'd like to encourage you, and I'm not asking for significant amounts of money here, hundreds of dollars or anything like that. We've raised so far around $700 of the roughly $1,700 total that we need to cover all of those direct out-of-pocket costs, including the $1,000 scholarship. But what I'm concerned about is if you do the Patreon account for a year, then between now and next August is when we need to be able to collect as much of that money as possible, because we're going to be distributing that money to the winner in probably August of next year. So if you can see your way clear to try to help us fund not only our program, but the cost of converting the scholarship fund to a 501c3, as well as funding the first year scholarship of $1,000, we sure would appreciate it. We desperately need your help. And we've had an awful lot of support, in my opinion, so far in the short period of time that we've been trying to start raising this money. And we've got a great team that's working on the criteria that we're going to use and how we're going to select the modeler that we're going to award the scholarship to. This is a beginning as far as I'm concerned. I hope that we can do this even more in following years. But if we can just get it off the ground and we can get the 501c3 and we can fund the first scholarship for the first year, then I think that'll be a major accomplishment for a bunch of model railroaders who are all volunteers, who are banding together, trying to help a future modeler get through college. And to me, that is very significant. Now, with that said, we also need help. We're all volunteers running this show. It's a live show once a week, plus the one that we do every 2 weeks on Thursday. And we have a website that we have to keep up, and we just need a lot of help. We need help on the website. We need help on running the shows. We need help on just making sure that we keep the details going and get our scholarship off the ground. So we need a lot of help. And I've been a little surprised that we haven't, for the past couple of months, we haven't gotten any new helpers. So if you're waiting for something, please don't wait any longer, because we really need some help trying to get all of this stuff done and keep all of these balls in the air, because we are doing an awful lot. And we think that we are making a significant contribution, not only for today's modeling, but for the future. So with that said, I want to talk about the 3 upcoming build-alongs that we have starting. All of them are going to start the same day on the 23rd of this month. One of them is Hangman Creek Dioramas. It's the first diorama that we tried to build. It's got a 50% discount that the manufacturer is offering on it. He was here on our show a couple of weeks ago, telling you about it and telling you about what's involved in it. And the same for the lighting company, Darren's Lighting Without Wires. I think that's going to be an exciting project. And I also think that the one that New Creations Victorian Modeling is offering, Alan Rogers, I think that's going to be a gorgeous church that Alan's going to be building on the show. And following that up, starting in December, Berkshire Valley's model, I think that's going to be great. And I think that that's something that a lot of modelers are going to be interested in. So I hope that you'll build them all. But if you can only do 1 or maybe 2, I understand that too. But it's like having your own mentor. Person on the show is going to be building it step by step, 15-minute max at a time. If it takes 4 or 5 weeks, no problem. And you'll be able to talk to them. You'll be able to ask questions, email back and forth, whatever. But it's like having your own mentor to help you improve your modeling. And that to me is what the show is all about. Our next My Build that Chris Course is the host of comes up November the 23rd. Dan Dawdy and his wife Amy sponsor this segment for us, and we are very appreciative of that. So let me turn this over to Chris because it comes up this month, November the 23rd is the next one. So Chris, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Thanks, Jim. Let's get to the share screen here. All right. Your next My Build is November 23rd. It's featuring you. And of course, it's sponsored by the Model Railroad Resource Publishers of O-Scale Resource and the S-Scale Resource. And we've got another slide here somewhere. If it'll move. Maybe not. All right. Well, come on. There we go. Okay. So to participate, it's railrunner130@hotmail.com is where you send your photos to. And if it's your first time participating, please enclose a picture of yourself, and that way we can have a title card for you. And I'll go ahead and put that email address in the chat window here in a minute. And where we are, there we go. Okay, all right, back to you, Jim.
And you know, I think we had 7 or 8 different modelers last month do this, and I hope we can double that. I'd really like to see us get 15 or 20 modelers, show what they're doing, and talk about what they're doing. I think it's a vital part of learning and passing along the knowledge and the skills of model building, to see what other modelers are building and hear them talk about how they built it. So anyway, if you're interested, please contact Chris, because we really want to try to make this something really special for you. Well, with that said, let's start tonight's show. First person I want to introduce is Hank Primas. Hank does quick tips for us. Hank, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Glad to be here. And let me see if I can get things going here. Nope, I blew it again.
Go for it, Hank. To share screen.
I'll get it. I'll get it.
Hang in there.
All right, now I know you can't see it, although I can.
Have you shared screen?
You know what?
Share the upper left. When you get
Here
to
we
the
go.
share screen,
He's got it. Go for it. Nice picture of you there, Henry.
Oh, thank you. Oh, there we go.
Where'd your hair go, Frank?
Can we see
You're
it now?
bad. Yes.
we can.
But make that
Oh.
one screen larger.
There you go. He's got it.
Come on, work. Here we go.
Beautiful.
Okay. Tonight we got something I call dryer sheet recycling.
Mm.
Now this is the dryer sheet, not the lint from the dryer, but the sheets that you put in to make things nice and soft. For you those who don't do any laundry, ask your wife about it. She can tell you about it because she probably pulls them out, throws them away. Boom, there's one, the box that it comes in. And there we go. And here's a new one before it's used. They don't work that well, but after it's been through the dryer cycle, it's nice and soft and it's a little bit bigger. So what we do is we take some old plaster of Paris, mix it up in a tray, get it nice and not soupy, but kind of mucky. And what you can then do is take the sheet, put it in. You can hardly see it once it's in. But if you look right around here, that's the sheet. Okay. Then what you do is you take your mold for whatever mountain that you may be working on, hills or rides, and slap it on. Now with this one here, you can see that I didn't leave it in the, get enough cookie stuff on it to make it stick because most of the times it comes out where you can't see through it. But this is very cheap because it doesn't cost you anything. Now, if you use paper towels or something or plaster cloth, that's a purchase. This is a freebie, something you already have. And that's all I got.
Hank, let me ask you a question. How much longer would you have needed to leave that in there?
Well, I would have had to leave it in there. I left it in there, I guess, about 30 seconds because I was trying to make the slides to go along. But if you get it good and thick, it doesn't take very long, maybe 10, 15 seconds.
Okay. Thanks very much. I particularly like the free part of this.
Yeah, it's free.
Thanks so much. See you next week.
Okay, thank you.
Now I want to go to Gary Shurgold, MMR. Gary does our bits and pieces, and most of the time, Gary's bits and pieces are free too. Gary, welcome.
Hi, Jim. How are you?
Good.
Okay, tonight, the items I'm going to talk about are not free, but if you look around and purchase them, you can buy them pretty cheap. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is, we'll get the screen up here, screen 2, and we're going to, whoops. Oh, great. Skipped out on me.
Go to slideshow, Gary.
Yeah, I gotta get back in. It knocked me right out completely.
Oh, we can see it.
Oh, can you see the slideshow?
Yeah, just go to slideshow.
Sorry. Can
There
you
you
see
are.
that?
Yes,
Okay.
there you are.
Okay, sorry about that.
No
It
problem.
knocked my lower screen out completely.
Hmm.
Okay, what we're going to talk about tonight is on bits and pieces. If I can get this to work. Okay, we're going to talk about, believe it or not, nail polish. And what I have here is, I didn't spend too much money on this, only like maybe $3 or $4 a bottle. And I've got green, orange, red, and clear. And what I use nail polish for is, whoops, wrong way, vehicles. Now, we all have vehicles on our layout, and really to bring them to life, nail polish works wonders on them. And what I do is, I get these little items here. After I use them, I save these, and I cut off the end. I do a real good shake on the nail polish bottle, take the little container out and turn it upside down and get a little bit on the end of that little pick thing there. And I very gently touch that to where I want the red light to be. And this just happens to be a red light on the back of a vehicle. And if you touch it very gently, if you get a sort of a generous amount of red color and just touch that, it'll come out as a bulb. It's quite nice. And what happens is it puts on a beautiful reflector on the back of your vehicle. Now, these are some vehicles before, and then these are the same vehicles after I have applied that method. It just gives them that nice sparkle, sort of fluorescent look to them. Now, I also use these on, now this isn't a very good picture and I apologize, but if you look here at this stoplight, I had the stoplights, I painted them, and I have the green, orange, and the red. And these are really nice. Instead of using jewels, which can become expensive, I use the nail polish. I also use the nail polish wherever, if you're using jewels in items like lanterns on locomotives or headlights on locomotives, etc., you can use the nail polish in place of those. And it's a fairly effective process. And there's another shot of the lights. I don't know if you can see them that well, but this picture is a little too far away for me to actually focus in and get a good picture, but you can get the idea. And that's bits and pieces for tonight, Jim.
Okay, I appreciate it. I've never tried that anything like that before. You're going to get, between you and Hank, you guys are going to get me in the cosmetic department. Yeah. All right. Listen, thanks so much. See you next week.
You're very welcome.
Well, now I'd like to turn to a segment that's really important, I think, because the best way that I know and how I learned a lot of the modeling that I learned was at a local club or a local NMRA division. And that's what we call our next segment. And Phil Edholm is the host for this segment for us. And we hope that by doing these segments, it'll give you an idea of what may be available at a local club or a local NMRA division near you, and may get you to a point where you want to go visit and see what they're all about. I hope so. So Phil, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Thanks, Jim. It's really great to have this opportunity to kind of carry forward some of the learnings that different people have had. And I have a very interesting guest tonight who's kind of has risen to a role that's kind of a bit above local. And it's Frank Markovich. He is actually the president of the Pacific Coast region. But has had a long-term set of roles in the divisions as well. And I thought he brought an interesting view of the challenges, as we go through some of the changes in the hobby, of trying to keep, the region together, keep everything working together. But so Frank, why don't we start off, just tell us a little bit about, your involvement with the NMRA and kind of modeling in general.
Okay, thanks, Phil. I've been in the NMRA, I think, since '76. I became a life member somewhere soon after that, maybe '78. I've held in the division, in the Coast Division. I started running a youth program for a few years. I was contest chairman. Then I moved over to being the superintendent of the Coast, and then the director. And now they've pushed me into PCR president. So I'm a Master Model Railroad 514, I believe. I'm very active in narrow gauge. I run an event called West Side Reunion every year. And that gives you an idea. What I have my own layout at home, and very active in the narrow gauge logging area.
So Frank, what do you see as the big challenges, in terms of between divisions, within divisions today? Because I think you kind of see it from the level of, getting volunteers, getting commitment. What do you think the big challenges are today?
Well, the biggest one really is getting volunteers and finding people that are appropriate for the job. I've already in each of the roles had people that said they could do it, and then they're unable to. And there's a little dance to not make them feel bad, but to replace them. Because, for example, I had a chief clerk in the Coast Division who, by the time we got the minutes from the meeting, it was into the next meeting. And that was unacceptable. Phil, I think you've experienced that too. So that's a big problem. When I took over as superintendent, there were 5 or 6 positions that were open, and like a bull in a china shop, I just took all of them on. And that isn't good, because you can't do multiple things. And some of the stuff I honestly wasn't very good at. I had my own business, as an example. I'll take it away from modeling just for a second. I had my own business as an engineer, and I tried to do the finance part, and I realized that was beyond me, and then I hired somebody to do it. So you need to know what your weaknesses are. That's one of the big challenges. Another challenge is in the Coast Division, a big challenge, and I think Phil's even going on with it now, is finding location. And there's a lot of requirements. So you have to define what you need and go out and look for it and find something that's affordable, that you're not going to lose money on. That's a big problem. I have a note here on that. And then another thing is keeping in the region. We just last year, I led a team to rewrite the manual of operations and the bylaws, because we had nothing in it about online stuff. And most of our meetings now are online, which has saved a lot of time and money. When I was director, when you'd have the mid-year meeting, you travel to wherever the regional meeting was going to be. And when it was in Bakersfield, I live in the Bay Area. Steve Schold was director at the time, and he lives in Santa Rosa. We had a long drive, and you basically had to spend the night. Well, besides the gas and wear and tear, there's spending the night. There's just a lot of money involved, where you can have a Zoom meeting or WebEx and do it all and spend more time on what you need to cover than on travel. And that's been important. The problem is, in our manual of operations, the meetings were supposed to be in person. So we weren't doing that for a while. Obviously, we weren't doing it during COVID, so we had to rewrite those. And right now, the membership's going to vote on a bylaw change. Currently, the business meeting, which is the last day of the annual convention, you need 35 members to hold the business meeting. That was set up when there were 1,500 members in the Coast Division. Now there's about 800. So we're going to vote on lowering it to 25 because there's a couple times we barely had enough. I was dragging people in almost off the street. So those are some of the big challenges.
So it's interesting that I think there's two challenges that you kind of referenced there that are interesting. The volunteers. How do we identify new volunteers that come in, or people that come in, new members that are willing to volunteer, or members that have been a member for a while are now in a position they can. And then I think the most important thing there is, finding and identifying people that can be comfortable in the role they're going into. And that's a real challenge.
And I'm not going to mention any names, but I've had people that have volunteered and said they wanted to do such and such. And you get to know the people and find out, well, what are their strengths? And you need to grow them. You wouldn't move somebody into director until they sort of knew what was going on in the division.
Right.
And in the region, actually. So you need to be able to grow people, start them off in a simple job that almost anybody can do. So they learn the people. You need to know the people. And that's really important.
Well, I think the other point that you made that's really interesting is, we use Zoom as a tool basically to replace face-to-face modeling during the pandemic. But the reality is it can very rapidly become a tool to operate more effectively. And, one of the things, for example, of things that were isolated in the past. So if you had a region where you have 4 divisions and each one does a convention every 4 years, because they were geographically separated in the way people work, those tended to be totally independent groups of people. What we're seeing now is all those business interactions, those are really business interactions, have migrated to Zoom. We're able to open it up and have larger participation of people across those events. Either to educate people about what they're going to need to do. And I think there's a lot of powerful value in how you use this technology that we're just figuring out from the perspective of managing ourselves.
This week, this is my 5th Zoom meeting relating to the PCR. There was a regional advisory committee meeting on Saturday that lasted a few hours. A lot of good things came out of it, and membership will hear about at least a couple of them soon. But also, there's the convention meeting. Well, the convention this year is in Sacramento. For me to go to a meeting at 7 o'clock in Sacramento, leave the Bay Area and get up there, I'd have to leave about 3:30. And, it'd last an hour and a half, and I'd get home at 10:30 at night. So that's a problem. But now I can be a member of the committee, listen in on the meeting, give my input, and the convention committees, for example, now are pretty much have people from all over. The last convention had a couple members from the Daylight Division. Our convention was in Rohnert Park. The Daylight Division, one of the guys was from the Fresno area, and he went to all the meetings on Zoom. So that has really been a good thing. Now, we have there are some issues with it, but overall, it's been a really good experience.
Yeah, in fact, that's one of the things we've been trying to do is to begin to share those resources. Because, one of the things I think during the pandemic, we all of a sudden jumped into this, people were using it in different ways. And as Jim was saying earlier, you begin to realize there are costs that you incur. And quite frankly, most divisions don't really use a resource like a Zoom to a level that justifies the cost.
Well, I'll give you an example. Our Zoom bill for the PCR is right around $300. Constant Contact is $300.
Yeah.
The RegFox, which we use, I think that's the name of it, for registration, is 1% plus $1. So for our convention in Sacramento, it's $150 for the convention, so it's $2.50 out of the convention for each person. But it buys us the ability, like the contest when somebody enters a contest, all their information's there. Whoever's the contest chairman, which is Earl, he can print it all out. He has all the information. He doesn't have to enter it. In the past, at the contest, they had to enter all the information in the contest room, and it would take 10 minutes for each model.
And I think there's another message there that's a really important message, is that sometimes it's better in an organization like the NMRA or even a local club to exchange money for something that makes it easier for volunteers. Not just for members, but for volunteers. In other words, one of the things you see is a lot of times what happens is says, well, it's going to cost us $2.50 per person to do that. Gosh, that's a lot of money. Think about how much money that is. And you stop and think about it and you say, okay, we're going to have 150 people there. That's $2.50 times 150. That's $500. What are we going to do commercially with $500? Well, we're not going to do that. Somebody's going to volunteer to throw something together. And two things happen when people get really frustrated, and then you end up putting up something that's inferior. I mean, if you look at something like Red Fox, it's designed. So I think that idea of using tools, but then sharing them is a great concept.
Right, which I'm trying to do with all of our tools. By the way, in your division, the auction, 3 or 4 times, you haven't been around long enough to know, 3 or 4 times people have offered to rewrite the auction program. As you probably know, it hasn't been rewritten because it's actually a big problem. It's difficult.
It's a big project. It's a fairly large project to do anything with technology. And if you can find, whether it's a constant contact or, the value, the thing that's so important is the value of the membership created by making it easy for volunteers.
Yes.
Because the challenge for volunteers is if you make it frustrating, if you make it challenging, and we've seen that, doing things, for example, on a show like this and trying to do it, it can become challenging. And so keeping it simple if you can, is really important. So
exactly.
I guess I'll throw it open, Jim. Anyone else have any questions for Frank? Really someone who's stayed very engaged with the NMRA, and I think it really has been someone who's been a mentor to getting me through this process of getting thrown in the fire of being a young member coming into the NMRA and then in a role, and then of course having to deal with the pandemic, which was interesting. So
just a comment, as president and before president, I was on a number of committees, NMRA committees, and I and Mike Blumenstadt built the layout at the Train Museum in Sacramento, and the scale model railroading exhibit.
Yeah, so if you go into the NMRA exhibit, there's a big model. It's about 14 feet long. That's basically part of it's unfinished. So you see kind of the levels of construction. The rest is finished, but I think you use primarily commercial parts to kind of show what you could do with commercial.
The requirement was all commercial parts, and everything was commercial with the exception of the wood used for the frame and the electronic components. All the models, all the scenery, everything was commercial. We did use real dirt, but that's about it.
And it is the only running trains in the exhibit. So it's pretty cool. If you go in there, you'll see it. Well, Jim, I think what we'll do is we'll throw it back to you.
Okay.
And thanks, Frank, for taking the time. And we will talk to you in the near future.
Frank, I got a question for you before you get away here.
Yeah.
Where is modeling in your region? Is model building just out of style now? Are people still doing it?
There's a lot of diehards who are still doing it, but it's nowhere what it used to be. The guys that have sort of taken up the whole thing are the prototype guys, the prototype modelers. They're doing a lot of modeling, but we have guys. There's guys that are doing some really incredible things. There's a guy, Joe Piazza, who's doing some 3D printing of trucks, logging trucks and logging equipment. On the West Side Reunion, we had 11 entries, I believe, Phil can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was 11 entries. To give you an idea, 3 years ago, before the pandemic, 4 years, however long it was, we had 20 something. So it's going lower. But what is increasing is the number of people involved in operations. The operations side is growing. One thing, by the way, you had an opportunity to see at Gorian Defeated. I did too. And I was a musician, and I had a gig on the night I was invited. I should have got a sub for the gig. I've regretted that for 50 years.
And, Jim, I felt we were kind of running out of time, and I didn't want to take too much time, but, one of the questions I was going to ask Frank is around this whole idea of mentoring. And so at the last division, at our last regional convention, Frank actually did a clinic where I think you built a storefront, Frank, that was.
We built three different parts of structures. Storefront was the last one, and hands-on. So it was like supposed to be an hour and a half, and it was 2.5, 3 hours. So when I do something that's hands-on, I schedule it right before lunch so that it can go a little longer.
Frank, what scale do you model?
Well, I've modeled in almost every scale you could imagine. I model mainly in ON3, although I was part of Yosemite short line, so I modeled ON30. I've built 3 HO scale models. Was an HON3 briefly. Logging HON3 geared locomotives when I started, they would run about a foot and stop. A foot might have been a long run. So I went into ON3, and then I built for shows. I've built with Mike Blumenstadt 2 N scale layouts. One that's a more normal freight operation, one that was a logging one. And believe it or not, the people liked the logging one more. But it was partly the track plan I think was more interesting. And,
well, listen, I've got some more questions. I'm going to have Phil give me your email. I'll send you an email if you don't mind. And
that's
maybe
fine.
Talk later. But Phil, if you could send me Frank's email, I'd appreciate it. Frank,
I will.
Thanks, Jim.
Frank.
Thank you all.
Yes, sir. Well, now I want to turn to the main part of our show tonight, and this is really important to me. It's called O-Scale Today. And I'll be honest with you, I've been in O-Scale, gosh, a long, long time. When I first got into O-Scale, what I remember was it cost an awful lot of money to buy a locomotive. The cars were basically kits. And you built a plywood platform and very little scenery, if scenery at all. So you had this great locomotive, detailed, great cars, detailed on bare plywood. And it was probably in my basement. That's what I remember about O-Scale. Well, that's not what O-Scale is today, in my opinion. And that's why we're doing this segment. And we've got some great people, I think, on a panel here to try to give us a view of really what O-Scale is today. And that's what this is all about. To try to educate you if you're considering O-Scale, or even if you're in O-Scale, maybe give you a little information you may not have known before. So with that said, I'd like to introduce them one at a time and maybe have them tell us a little bit about their experience in O-Scale, so we'll get a feel for what their real interest in the scale is. And first, let me introduce Pat Rivard. Pat, welcome. Thank you.
There's a lot of things that I've been asked is that the scale is too big for a room, too small. And that's the first question I get. And it isn't true, because the room I'm in is about 10 or 12 feet wide and about 14, 15 feet long. And when I started out with Lionel. Then I went to HO scale. And then from HO scale, I went to G scale, which is called LGB at the time. And then I started up a hobby shop because I didn't think there was enough stuff available in G scale. So I started up a hobby shop. From there, when I sold the hobby shop, I jumped into a O scale. So I tried all scales, and I found O scale was more pleasing to me and more rewarding because of the size of it. But then I also found out it wasn't cheap either, depending on what you wanted to pick, like brass and plastic. And you had to do a lot of searching at the time when I started into this. I've been into this modeling of O scale for 14 years. I live in a condo, a freehold. And to tell you the truth, I'll never look back. I enjoyed that much.
Thank you so much, Pat, and I appreciate you wanting to do this evening. Next, I'd like to introduce Dan Dawdy. Dan is the editor and co-publisher with his wife, Haley, of two magazines that I've been writing for about 5 years now, S-Scale Resource and O-Scale Resource. So Dan, if you could tell us a little bit about your involvement with O-Scale, and I appreciate you being here this evening.
Well, I think like many people, I came from Lionel. My dad had a big layout, and that's where I got enthused about it. But I believe it was the early 70s where Lionel appeared to be going down the dumper. So in 1978, I bought my very first two-rail O-scale locomotive, kind of putting the cart before the horse. But I've really never looked back. Just after that, you know, we started to have a lot of kits coming out. Weaver came online, Intermountain came online, and things were a little bit easier to get. And the size was right. I mean, I always liked the bulk of O-scale. When you look at HO or N, they're beautiful, and I've been to many layouts, but they just don't have the same feel or the same sound. So that's what really sold me on O-scale, and I've been there ever since.
Fantastic. Well, next I want to introduce another O-scaler, David Vaughn. David is president of an organization. David, you'll have to forgive me. I call it O-Scale Kings because I just can't remember what the new name is. I apologize.
It's O-Scale Central, but it serves the same kind of purpose, and hopefully with a little more activity and interaction with the scale and the people who model in it. My connection with O was like a lot of other people. This is not necessarily a scale you start in. I was a serious HO scale modeler and had a rather large brass locomotive collection. I moved to Washington, D.C. I got tangled up with John Armstrong and the Round Robin group that he led. I was hooked on O. I too have never looked back. It's the relationship between the models and the modeler varies a lot more than you might think with the scale. You can have a very pretty in-scale layout, but essentially from 5 feet away, it's a small line. So you can focus on a whole train, you can focus on mountain scenery, but it's very difficult to have a close relationship with a car in the smaller scales. So I like being able to look at individual models, to be able to add detail to them, to be able to watch whole trains, but one car at a time as they go by. And as Dan said, the mass, the feel of O-scale is simply not something that you can replicate in the smaller scales. There are trade-offs, but we're all dedicated O-scalers.
Thank you, David. Now I want to introduce another O-scaler, David Schultz. And David, welcome.
Well, welcome. I guess I'll make it unanimous. Started with Lionel, just like the rest of you. And probably in the 70s, I ran into my first Atlas model, Atlas F units. And I was astonished at the difference between the Lionel and O-scale. I didn't know there was such a thing. O-scale was Lionel. I found, the Atlas F units in the caboose, and I compared them to Lionel, and that was the end of that. I boxed it all up and took it to flea markets and sold it off. And I met a good friend who was very astute at turning very cheap items into O-scale items. He would buy broken Lionel cars, cut them up, glue them back together, widen them out, whatever it took. and he could make an O scale car for about $5. So, and I was an O scaler on an HO budget. I just didn't have a lot of money when I was younger. So I followed in his footsteps. I'd buy sheets of styrene and carve away anything that didn't look like what I was building. And then ran into the wood kits, and the wood kits, at about that time, Weaver was coming out with their plastic cars. And so some of the wood kits you could find incredibly reasonable, you know, a couple, $3 for any quality craft hopper, because nobody wanted to build the hoppers after Weaver came out with them. So I've always been able to do things on a real budget. So, you know, when people tell me O scale is far too expensive, it's like, well, not if you're going to put some effort into it, you know. And with O scale, you don't need 100 ore cars. You know, you can build 10 of them, and that's more than enough to suffice. But I too have got a room that's 14 by 21, and I can't run auto racks and double stacks and that kind of thing. But I can certainly model the 50s with 40-foot cars, you know, 50-foot cars. I'm going to have 60-inch radius curves, so 50-foot cars can be about the max. But and then my son James, who couldn't make it tonight, he's got a layout with 90-inch curves. So all the passenger stuff I build, I'll take over to his house and run it there. Or, you know, I can take it down to clubs. I've joined a couple clubs, and I can take my O scale stuff, my second generation bigger stuff, down there and run it there. So that's a little bit of my history with the O scale.
David, thank you. I'm sorry James couldn't be here. James is just a fantastic O scale modeler. He is. He's one of those people I just admire what he does so much. Let me start by doing this. What is O scale? Is O scale quarter inch? Is O scale 1764? Is O scale proto 48? Is O scale 7 millimeter? Is O scale 143? Is O gauge Lionel O scale? What is O scale? Anybody wants to this is kind of a open discussion. Nobody has to raise their hands. If you have a comment, that's the question. What is O scale today?
I always considered double the size of HO.
A better way to look at that is 8 times the mass of
That's
HO,
right.
because that's really what you're looking at. That same idea.
Anybody model in 1764 anymore?
There are a couple of history guys that collect 1764s, and every once in a while you'll see something at a train show. But it is at this point, I don't know anybody that models in it, and I think it's basically a historical collectible rather than a live variation on the scale. But the short answer to your question, Jim, is it's all of the above. It's a collection of scales at and close to quarter inch to the foot.
Gotcha. What about 3-rail Lionel? Is that considered a part of the O scale family?
I think Lionel and that 3-rail grouping is always described as O scale. I don't know why they call it O scale, because some of the Lionel is not scale to look at. It hasn't got the details that some of the newer stuff has. But anyway, I think there's some great layouts in 3-rail. You got to give them credit. We saw some on our show there not too long ago. We had one fellow that I couldn't believe the stuff he had done. Looks better than some of the stuff that we all do.
There's a wide variety of equipment and levels of detail and fidelity in 3-rail, from the giraffe cars that we point and snigger at to some of the scale 3-rail guys, quote unquote, that use Katie couplers and as close as they can get to scale proportions, with the only thing that's really different being the 3rd rail down the middle. Now that's a pretty big eyesore when you look at it, but there are people in 3-rail scale who do beautiful work. And I think realistically, we have to have them as part of 2-rail O scale's larger community, And we have to thank them, because if it weren't for the 3-rail guys who split runs by manufacturers that do both 2-rail and 3-rail, we wouldn't have a lot of the equipment that we have. So I say good things about 3-rail, especially the 3-rail scale guys.
I agree with you 100%, and not just the equipment manufacturers, it's the structure manufacturers, it's the detail parts guys, it's all the various hobby manufacturers in O scale. They could care less who they're selling to. You know, if it's an O scale, or that's all they're really interested in. So I couldn't agree more with you, David. If I was coming into O scale today, would I come into 1/4 inch? Would I come in Proto 48? Would I come in 143 or 7? What would I come into? What would be your recommendation for me to consider as my entry into O scale?
I think one thing you have to differentiate is scale and gauge. People get that mixed up quite a bit. This is 1/4 inch scale. The gauge of the track can vary. Now, there's a YouTuber out there named Toyman Television who did a couple of videos on gauge and scale here the last couple of weeks. Pretty interesting. For whatever reason, and it goes back in history, and his videos can explain more, we somehow ended up at a 5-foot gauge in standard O scale, not 4 foot 8.5 inches. It's an historic thing. It's there. And I think when you brought up 1764 or whatever, that was a way to make the equipment bigger, so that the track scaled back to 4 foot 8.5 inches. And it just never caught on. Then we have Proto 48, and those people are running the exact proper track gauge, but it's still 1/4 inch. And as far as Lionel and so forth, again, they're stuck at the 5-foot gauge also. But yeah, you got to always remember gauge versus scale are two different things. But 1/4 inch is where we are. We have a lot of gauges there, whether it's ON3, ON30, ON2. But I think if you're getting into it with a budget, it's going to probably be what we call OW5. There's nothing wrong with Proto 48. And if you're coming from a smaller scale and you are a tremendous modeler and you want the fidelity, Proto 48 is something good to look at, because it's the proper gauge. But there's not as much available. You're going to have to do a little more work on your own.
Proto 48 also has a higher fidelity in terms of clearances between the rails and the guardrails. You could think of it as being like HO fine scale. It's the same kind of concept. So you're not simply looking at a gauge adjustment, which is really, the proverbial silly little millimeter, but you're looking at the tolerances that are tighter on switches and so on. And generally, the guys who work in Proto 48 think of them as being O-scale railroad prototype modelers. They are really not only into the correct gauge and the tolerances and flanges and wheel width and so on, but they're talking about high levels of detail, high levels of fidelity, closer coupling cars, all of the little things that we all make some compromises with when we get into model railroading. They carry it to a very high level.
Well, Dave Schultz, that's what you model, right? You're in P48.
Yeah, I do Proto 48, and when I got started into it, I was worried about tolerances were too tight, and I just figured, it's a little ridiculous. The bigger flanges, the wider wheel, it just makes for a more reliable running. But I was talking to one gentleman about the Proto 48, and he said the tolerances are no different than HO scale. It's the same tolerance. The wheels are, the flanges are 20,000ths of an inch, which equals, a 1 inch in the actual prototype, which is what the flange is. And he said, so if HO modelers can handle a track, he said, by God, O scalers should be able to handle a track, because it's exactly the same tolerance as what HO is dealing with. And that's what pushed me over. And I thought, well, okay, now one of the things that James and I've kind of discovered, that if you're going to go with Proto 48, you need to really have your trucks equalized well, because you got 20 thousandths of an inch for a flange. It doesn't take much of a rise of that truck for it to derail. So you've really got to make sure that your springs are looser so that the trucks actually operate the way the real McCoy does, so that the wheel never leaves the rail, but the truck can move around on deviations in the track and through switches. And it's kind of fascinating to watch them actually work the way the real prototype does. But it makes for a little bit of a pain. You got to buy different springs, a little softer springs, so that the wheels, like I say, remain in contact with the rail. They don't raise up. Where with regular 5-foot gauge, you've got a little more leeway in that.
David, I've been in O scale for a long time. If I wanted to go to P40, I got no idea what kind of springs you're even talking about.
Well, Amazon's got a good kit that you can buy for like $8, and there's many springs in there, and you just trim them to whatever length they rate them by pounds. The springs I use are rated for 1 pound, and you put 4 of them in there, so typically you're good for 4 pounds. Well, a 2-pound locomotive on 1 pound springs will crush those springs about halfway down, and that's about where you want it. Now the wheel can bounce around, and joints that are off a little bit, it'll rise up and over. The truck will it will equalize just like the real thing. It's kind of fascinating. But yeah, you can do Amazon, and then there's an outfit that I buy my springs from. I think it's like WB Jones or something out of Tennessee, and they're very helpful. You can call them and tell them what you're up against, and give them the dimensions you're looking for, and they've got a spring to match it.
Well, let me ask you all this. Why should I consider O scale? I'm not in O scale right now. I've got my choice of all these different scales. What is the one positive, the one main reason that's going to draw me or should draw me to choose O scale as my modeling scale?
The thing that brought me into it most of all was the fact that I can build something unique, and it's not something everybody's going to have. One of the things that kind of cracks me up, I had a good friend collect the Santa Fe Super Chief in HO, and he was so proud of that, 17 cars, 4 Unit F, and he took it down to Milwaukee to show it off. And the guy said, well, we've already got 2 Super Chiefs here, but go ahead and put it on the track and we'll get it out there sometime. And I kind of chuckled, and I thought, well, that drives me crazy. I would rather have something that people walk up and go, I've never seen anything quite like that. And that pleases me to no end, but that's me. That's the kind of stuff I like. I like building unique items, things that nobody's seen before. And this last Chicago, I brought those commuter cars, and they were quite the hit to the show.
Well, it seems that what you're saying is it's a model builder scale for you.
For me, it is. It doesn't have to be. There's plenty of items out there that can be purchased that are all built up. You may have to modify a little bit. Lionel, amazingly enough, I never thought I'd buy Lionel anything ever again. And some of their scale equipment is better than anything else I've seen. They've got a steel reefer that is second to none in detail. They've got the paint absolutely correct. The only thing you have to rub off of there is the built by Lionel down in the corner, but otherwise the car is just phenomenal.
What about somebody else? What's the one factor that's going to bring me to O scale?
I think it's going to be detail. You look at some of the HO equipment out there, and it's got this on the engine, and it's got the speed recorder over there, and it's got this over here, and you back away 2 feet and it all disappears. In O scale, that stuff is right out front and it's there. And whether it be the underframe of the car with the brake rigging, the detail is just phenomenal. And I think that's one of the big draws. And of course, as you get a little older, the fact that the stuff is a little bigger doesn't hurt either. But I know a buddy of mine, that Glenn Guerrera, that owned Rivard Model Works for years, would take his O-scale kits, wood kits, down to some of the prototype modelers meets. And that was mostly HO guys, but he sold a lot of kits down there, not because they're going to convert to O-scale tomorrow, but they just couldn't get over the amount of detail that those models had and offered the builder.
Yeah, I'd go back to the relationship between the model and the modeler. And what everybody here is saying is that in O-scale, it is just a much more enjoyable, satisfying relationship. The detail that you put on is easier to put on. And once you put it on, it's easier to see. And you can focus on individual equipment. But I'll tell you something, relatively close to you, watching a train of O-scale cars, which you can focus on one car at a time, is really a very satisfying experience. And it's something that you just can't get in the smaller scales. I've been there. Now, another way to look at it is O-scale is a great cure for bifocularism. So
I found it would give me a chance to express myself.
Yeah.
In the detail and the building and the woodworking part of it, building your bench work, your mountains, your trees. I like building trees, as you can see. Anyway, that's what I found. It gives you a chance to really express yourself and what you can do and show it off.
All right, so now you got me convinced. I really ought to take a hard look at it. What's the drawback I find? What's the main drawback now that's going to say, I don't know?
I think price is out there. That's the elephant in the room, always has been. But if you go to shows, especially O-scale specific shows, you're going to find a lot of good equipment at really decent prices, especially on the secondary market. There are just a ton of Atlas cars out there that are on the secondary market that you could buy new at $89, and you go to a show and they're $25.
Mm-hmm.
And there's still a plethora of kits out there. You talking about the old kits like Ambroid and Quality Craft, you can still find those in boxes for $5, $6, $7, $8. And with a little work and a few extra details, they still make marvelous cars. So, price doesn't have to be an issue. You just have to buy smart and know where to look for the stuff. And, and realize that you're not going to have a 25 car coal train of brass hoppers from a high-end manufacturer. I mean, I can't afford that. I just finished a 20 car hopper train that was KTM cars from the 50s. I just put a few extra details on those, painted them. And, you go back 3 feet, you can't tell them from a $300 car. So there's ways to get around that, but you just have to be smart.
I think,
but
go ahead. Go ahead, David.
One of the things that we try and do with some of our display layouts at O-scale Central is to go to all scale shows. And O-scale, when you look at it and get that feel, it's a very compelling sell job, and people will come up and they'll say, and you talk about the biggest drawback. The biggest drawback I find is somebody says, I would love to do O-scale, but I've got all this HO or in-scale or 3-rail or whatever, and I just couldn't give it up. And I got two comments to that. One is, and I think it was David Schultz said, you can, oh, I'm sorry, it was Dan who said Glenn Garrow would take his O-scale kits to the RPM meets, and people who were not O-scalers would buy them simply because they respected the design and the detail and so on. You can do that as an HO scale or in-scale modeler. Buy an O-scale kit. Find out what it's like, get the satisfaction of doing it. Now, I had a lot of HO when I converted, and I sold off my HO over a period of several years, and it funded the entire transition into O-scale. I don't think I took any money out of my pocket for 2 or 3 years after I started. I simply sold the O-scale and used it as seed money. But you don't have to do that. You can do it keeping your present equipment, keeping your present layout. get the satisfaction from building a kit or two, see if you like it. If you do, you can convert.
I think a lot of people get afraid of, if they put a lot of work into their HO or other scale, they hate the idea of tearing the whole layout apart and getting rid of all that stuff and going to flea markets and selling their stuff little by little. And you've got a good idea there, David. Just take a little bit at a time, work on some kits, putting it together, and you know, getting the feel for it, and at the same time try and get rid of some of the other stuff. That's how I got back into O scale. I got rid of everything else, sold it, traded it off, and then I bought myself some O scale and got started in it. I already knew what it was about. And another thing, you should study very well what you're getting into. There's a lot of people will jump into something quickly and then lose interest in it, and it's, you know, it doesn't prove to be anything after a while. Like, go to a lot of flea markets, a lot of shows, look online. You can see a lot of shows online and videos that'll show you what it's all about, give you some ideas of what you got to do. That's where I learned a lot of it. It was online and through a lot of books. I got a ton of books on this stuff. So, you know, you just got to you got to research it, and what scale you're going to do and how big you're going to get and what type of thing you're going to do. If you're going to do lumbering, if you're going to do operations, engine yard setups, there's a lot involved, and you want to look at each one of these things. You can't put it all into one layout. It's very difficult to do in O scale, but it is very interesting.
All right, so now I'm convinced. I want to try O scale. Nobody lives close to me that I know of that's involved in it. I don't have any club or division or anybody to talk to. I can go on the internet, but you know, that gets boring fast for me. So where do I go to find out about O scale, to find out what standards I need to use for my model in O scale?
Go to NewTrack.
To find out, you know, what are the tips that people can give me to, you know, to be able to not make the same mistake everybody else has made coming into the scale. Where do I go?
NewTracks.
I
Telling
think,
you all about it now.
I think shows are a big deal. You know, there are more O scale shows now than there have been for a while, smaller regional shows. But by the same token, and I know not everybody's on Facebook and some people don't like it, but there is just a wealth of information on the two rail groups there that you can ask any question under the sun. Nobody's going to make fun of you. They're going to answer your questions, and you're going to come up with you know, some camaraderie with these people. And you know, I'm in a wasteland where I live. There's nobody close to me. I'm kind of a one-man band, but there's just so much information that's out there online. I know it's not the same as having somebody next to you guiding you, but it's the next best thing right now. So I think that's a big place to look for help. And of course, O scale Central, O scale Kings, once we get the new site migrated, as far as your specifics on gauge or scale and so forth, and specifications, that information is up there.
Dan is very modest, but one of the best things that's happened in two rail O scale is his magazine, O Scale Resource, which is an online, free, 100 or more pages published every 2 months. And it has not only a lot of how-to articles, a lot of here's what's happening by way of news, here's the new kits that are being built, but a lot of personal columns about how to do things. And it's oscaleresource.com, right?
Yes.
And yeah, so there is that. There are a couple of good Facebook groups, but a couple is too small. There are multiple ones. Ken Burney has one. Simply go to that little magnifying glass that's on your Facebook homepage and type in 2Rail O, and Ken's group and a lot of others will come up. And exactly because the visibility of the scale has been low and the community is supportive but small, and we no longer have a Walther's catalog and we no longer have retail hobby shops to go to, we have come up with a scale-wide product and service guide an introduction to 2-rail O that is all accessible or will be accessible when the reorganized website comes up through oscalecentral.com. And to sort of get a head start on it, and this is a plug for the NMRA, which has historically been primarily an HO scale operation, but they have a monthly magazine. And I did for NMRA a survey article on things that are going on in the scale right now, all the links, all of the websites and so on. It was in the May issue. I think that may be backwards and I apologize for that, but it's called O Positive, the case for 2-rail O. And NMRA graciously allowed us to reprint the magazine. And so you can go on oscalecentral.com once it's up and running again. It's down for reorganization. Dan is working with us now. You can go on that and download a copy directly. And it's got sort of who's who and what's what and how to get in touch and so on. So there are a lot of good things happening in O-Scale. We did this survey article especially to try and put it all in one place. But Dan Dawdy is probably the single place I would start would be Dan Dawdy's online free magazine. And now in its 11th year, by the way.
Are there standards in O-Scale? Is there a module standard, for example, or that kind of thing like there is for HO?
I think if you took the HO standard in a module and just doubled it, you'd have yourself an O-Scale module set up.
Okay.
There are, of course, a number of different modular standards, even in HO, and everybody, and periodically that changes. Yes, there is an O-Scale modular standard. There is NMRA. There are NMRA standards for O-Scale and for Proto 48. It's a matter of researching them and finding the ones you like, but there's a guy, the president of the Detroit Model Railroad Club, Skylar Shippey, is working on using the newer O-Scale modular standard right now and has built several modules. And I'm hoping we'll bring them to the Chicago show in March, which David is very much involved in the planning, David Schultz. And perhaps at some point you might want to ask him a question about the Chicago O-Scale show, since it's one of the premier venues in our scale. Just a suggestion.
Nice suggestion.
I love the Chicago O-Scale show. That's the first show I ever entered a model in a contest. It took first place. I never will forget that show. Let me ask you this. How much space do I need for O-Scale? Do I have to own a warehouse to be able to be an O-Scaler?
The thing I noticed is a lot of these module clubs that show up at the shows, if you compare the size that they are to any of the rooms, what convinced me to build one in this little room I've got, it's 14 by 21, was I was looking at a module layout and it was 12 by 15, I think. And I thought, well, for heaven's sakes, if they can get something like this, and I can build something in my room. You just have to scale back the size of the equipment, of course, but that doesn't bother me at all. I can run shorter cars. I can do that. And then with the Proto 48 thing, I think I can get away with a little bit tighter radiuses for some of the equipment. So.
Okay.
Yeah, my basement is only 30 by 28. And of course, we had to move a few things around to get things in there, but I can run 64-inch radius curves. It's a double deck. It's more operation than one guy can handle. So, in fact, I don't know if any of you guys know Joey Ricard, but he's Trackside Specialties. He's got a video series now. He's building an O-Scale shelf layout, and he's taking you through how he's doing it and so forth. But he's going to have a lot of operation on a very small layout. So it just depends what you want to do. If you're going to be running, auto racks, well, that's going to take a lot of room. But if you're modeling like a short line or something like that, you could do a lot of switching and a lot of operation in a small area.
Yeah, my son James's basement is 26 by 26, I believe. It's almost square, and he's got 90-inch curves in that basement. And people are astonished when they show up. I mean, you see the photographs and they're thinking this thing is built in a warehouse, and they show up at his house at some of his open houses, and they're absolutely astonished at the amount of O-scale you can fit in a basement of that size.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. I've heard many of you, I think all of you have talked about you enjoy the building, the model building as part of O-scale, and maybe that's part of what drew you in originally. Do I have to be a scratch builder? How talented a modeler do I have to be to really become an O-scale modeler?
I think that just depends on what you're doing. I mean, when Intermountain came out with their 37 boxcar in the 90s, I mean, the first one I built was a disaster. The second one was better, and then I got really proficient at it. I think one of the things that makes you want to go off into different types of options, I model 1947, and there's some beautiful pictures online that Delano took of yards in the 40s, and you look at the mix of cars, and it's a huge variety. We don't have variety like that today. Yeah. And, when Atlas came out with their Reefer series in the early 2000s, man, I was like a kid in a candy store. All the colors and all the designs, and my God, my wife thought they were cute, and I must have, 25 of these stupid things, but they're all the same car. They're just different paints. So then you look out at some of the, urethane kits. There's a lot of producers out there that make unusual cars, relatively inexpensive. Southern Car and Foundry is a great one. Twin Star Cars, Rails Unlimited, all are making marvelous looking freight cars that will give you the variety. Do you have to scratch build? No, I don't. I kit bash and I modify. But if you want to scratch build, I mean, this is a great opportunity to do so. But you don't have to. I sure don't. You
can model as simply as getting out your credit card and buying a ready to run out of the box Atlas car. They've got a full line. You can do the same thing with diesels. Steam is a little more limited, but it's all there. There are always time and money trade-offs. If you want to build it from scratch and have that kind of model, it's going to cost you some time. If all you want to do is get out your credit card and swipe it, you can walk out of the hobby shop, or more likely an online retailer, with a whole train of very high quality, very accurate equipment.
What about scenery? What about trees and structures and figures and automobiles, all that kind of stuff? That pretty readily available in O-scale?
Yes, it is available, but the price is another thing. I find that if you can take practice, you can build a good tree and a good layout, just the plaster work. If you pay attention to some of the ideas that are available, it won't break the bank.
Yeah, and once again, going to the flea markets, the O-scale flea markets, you can buy building fronts. I kind of missed an opportunity here in the last one. A guy had a huge building front. They must have been 5 feet long and 4 stories high, and he wanted $20 for it. Well, it's perfect for gluing against a wall or placing up against a wall to make it look like a cityscape. And once again, you didn't have to spend a lot of money to do it. But if you scour some of these shows, it's absolutely amazing. And I wish I lived closer to the East Coast, because they seem to have an O-scale show about every other month. But from where I live up here in the Great White North, I can only make about 1 or 2 shows a year. So
let me ask you this: what's not available in O-scale that you really would like to see available, but it's just not there?
Probably turnouts that are ready to go. you know, a lot of turnouts. I mean, you can buy them, but you got to lay the ties and spike the switch down and such. Be kind of nice. I mean, I know Atlas has got some of the stuff, but it's pretty pricey. It'd be nice to have, you know, like the HO people, they go out and they buy turnouts for $30, $40 a piece and they slap them down and they run trains over that stuff. It'd really be nice to have something in that fashion. We've got track that works pretty well, but it's the turnouts that seem to be the, like I say, to buy one complete, you know, you're looking at 100, 100 a quarter for one turnout. You can get them less expensive, but then you're gonna be doing a bunch of work hand laying the things. But it'd be kind of nice to see something in that fashion. Especially for somebody like me with the Proto 48 thing, I got to put in my slug for the Proto 48. But, you know, with a smaller layout too, like I'm going to have, it's nothing to spend an afternoon spiking track. And like James, you know, his layout isn't that big, but he's detailing the, you know, the guts out of it. He's cutting the rail every 40 feet or 39 feet and then putting joint bars on either side of it. So, you know, even though you don't cut all the way through, you just cut the head of the rail and then put the joint bar on there and you get that kind of detail. Jay Criswell's got, you know, incredibly detailed turnouts, you know, the slide plates, the throw rods, the check rail, you know, adjustable tie plates and so, and you put those together and people are just astonished to look at that kind of thing. So kind of fun to build a small layout and just detail it to no end. And people discover something new every time they come over.
That's interesting. It really is. How is O-Scale promoted today? Who is out there really hustling for O-Scale? Who is making the case that O-Scale needs to grow and develop and people need to come into the scale?
Well, I think the O-Scale Kings are O-Scale Central now. Obviously, we are with our magazine. And I must say, because I'm getting stared at by Martin, there is an O-Scale magazine out there that is print. O-Scale Trains is being published, and that's another great resource for information. But yeah, I think it's the Kings, O-Scale Central. I think it's our duty to really start pushing, and I've seen some, you know, there was a while that we were kind of a dead organization, but we are now pushing harder. We got some good people on the board. We got good people working. And I think that's going to be the biggest thing, hopefully, to spearhead this and to have not only O-Scale Central, but O-Scalers in general start going to their prototype modelers meets. I mean, those are the guys that are modeling to the nth detail. And I say it again, when they see what we can do and what we have compared to what they're looking at with an HO or an N-scale model, you're going to get some converts. May not be right away, but it's going to be in the back of their minds.
Dan is absolutely right with the RPM people. I took a sectional layout based on the Tony Custer series and Model Railroader to the recent Mid-Atlantic Railroad Prototype Modelers meet. And it got a lot, and by the way, it's 27 inches wide, which you don't have to, meaning you don't have to have a warehouse. And it is 36 feet long, but it's in 9 sections. And you've got layout design elements. You can run through a town, you can turn the trains at the end of the sections. And the HO scale RPM guys were very impressed. And I got a lot of, God, I wish I could switch to O-Scale, but I've got all of this HO stuff. So I had to talk them out off the ledge with that. But Dan is right. One of the problems we've got in O-Scale is it's almost all small people. You do have Atlas, but Atlas's primary focus is not in O. And you've got some wonderful manufacturers, Sunset Third Rail, O-Scale Trains, Martin Breckbeel's White River Productions magazine is doing good. There isn't a strong central point. This really has to be a bootstraps operation, which is why it's been very difficult to get going. We hope and think we've got something of a head start. But there are people everywhere who are trying to do their own little thing. So Ken Burney with his Facebook page. Jim Allen also has a guide to products and services. We're all out here doing our little bit, and we appreciate the support of New Tracks. Jim, you're one of the reasons we do this, or are able to do it, is because it gives us exposure, and we appreciate that. Lots of little things. It's a bottom-up operation.
Well, thank you so much. I enjoy doing it. I appreciate all of you taking your time tonight. Where is O-Scale tomorrow? Look ahead 5 years. Where is O-Scale?
It'll still be here.
I think it'll be growing with the advent of 3D printing now. And I have found some of the most generous people, they will go through all the trouble of designing this stuff, and then they just give you the file. You know, Sarah over in Austria, she designs some wonderful items, and then she just sends you the file and says, go ahead and print it yourself. I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And I found that with other people too, that they're willing to do all of this and charge you a minimal amount to make the part for you. I've found some 3D printers who are willing to do it for the cost of the resin. So you're ordering parts from them and they'll say, just give me $3. That's more than enough. So I think with the advent of 3D printing, which I see the good and the bad of both, but I think mostly good, is that even local people who 3D print HO stuff or even S-scale stuff, you can tell them, well, can you scale that up and make, yeah, absolutely, not a problem. I'll scale that up to 1/48, or, the guy I deal with here in Duluth, he just wants to know what an inch is in O-scale. Well, I tell him 0.0208 is a scale inch, and then he can take the actual drawings and convert it into a part that is just phenomenal. So I think that with 3D printing, the future is getting pretty bright for O-scale at this point.
And primarily because of 3D printing.
Well, it certainly adds. You can design and build stuff that's never been available before, and at minimal cost. It used to be to make a mold of some item and such. You're looking at hundreds of dollars, and now they can 3D print the part. And I think Dan does it quite a bit, where they'll take the part then and put it in a mold and burn it out with liquid brass, and convert the plastic part into a brass part. And it's just, I think that's phenomenal.
And it's part of the O-scale community. We're a relatively small scale, and a lot of us are geographically spread out. But we really do go out of our way to support people, and that's one of the real satisfying parts of the hobby. You start out thinking that model railroading in general and O-scale in specific is all about the hardware. It's about the engines, and it's about finding the outer production piece and so on. And then you realize over a period of time, it's really about the people. It's about the friendships you make and the enjoyment that you have with each other. That's really what makes the scale go, probably even more than the hardware. And I think O-scale is special in that regard. We really are a tight group.
I've offered kits to friends of mine who are on other scales just to get their feet wet. I said, go ahead, build it, have fun with it. And some of them are a little leery, and some of them really enjoyed it when they did it.
I do clinics at NMRA meets and on introduction to O-scale. And at the end, I give away Intermountain kits.
That's a challenge.
Well, we all know, you can get an Intermountain kit, which is a fun kit to build and very reputable in terms of the fidelity. And you can buy them at flea markets for $15 because nobody wants to build kits anymore, or at least a relatively small number. So I give them away, and they are enthusiastically people really appreciate that.
Let me open this up a little bit to our audience. Anybody else have any questions about O-scale for the panel?
I hear a pin drop.
Well,
this is Phil. So I think the interesting question about O is that it seems to me that the place that we've seen growth in O is more in narrow gauge in ON30. I mean, I thought it was interesting. You said Atlas, the only major manufacturer. I mean, if you look at ON30, to a great extent, Bachmann was singularly responsible for creating that whole space, which has become a really big space. I mean, if you look at, some of the modelers in the modeling lifestyle, it's been a real preponderance of ON30 modelers who are less layout builders and more model builders. And I think that's the other kind of thing to really think about is, is O a model builder scale? Yes, because people tend to build more models in O and less layouts. And, I think coming back to your other point about operations earlier that Frank made about the number of people in operations, it's a lot easier to set up and do operations in HO just because the scale being able to be modeled. Right? If you take the same size room, a 20 by 20 room, and you build an HO layout in it versus an O layout, in terms of what you can model for operations, it's dramatically different. So if you're more focused on that than on details, then O is probably may not be a great choice for you. Right. So I think there are some things, it's not completely rosy, but I think it's also important to talk about the the ON30 side of things, the ON3 side of things, because I think that's a fairly big modeling community. Anyway, thanks. Enough said.
Jim, you ask about the future of O-scale, and I think the future of model railroading generally is going to be a little different than we have now, to the extent that I think our supply chain issues with China, I think prices with China, I think all of those things are going to be different 5 years from now than they are now. One of the advantages of O-scale is they've been building two-rail O-scale models for 100 years. Yep. There is an enormous amount of models out there, and it's a little different than working in the bigger the scales with more people involved. The role of the secondary market on O-scale yard sale and eBay and flea markets and auctions and so on is much larger than it is as a proportion of the hobby in HO. But there is a lot of material out there. So we're not going to run out of trains, even if China dries up completely. Well, we might after another 100 years or so, but for 5 years out, it's not going to be a problem. And the stuff on the secondary market is of very high quality, and it is comparatively cheap. People used to say O-scale is way too expensive. O-scale prices are probably somewhere around HO scale prices right now for comparable pieces of equipment. So and I think the new 3D printing and resin casting and so on, I think that was made for O-scale. We really don't have to have inventories. We can deal with short runs. We can work with scalable drawings and basically poach off of what other scales are doing and use them creatively. So I think the future of O-scale is quite positive.
I think, it's kind of funny. People say O-scale is dying and all this stuff, but I look at people that Jim has, working with him. The gentleman that runs the build along. He's I believe he's a kit cutter. He's got O-scale. I know the guy that's doing the church. He's got O-scale product. All these smaller people seem to have O-scale product. Well, if they weren't selling it, they wouldn't do it. So, somebody's buying that stuff. And there's always new models coming out. Now, this isn't the structure area, I agree, but still, if there wasn't a market for it, these guys wouldn't be doing it. And they are, and there's just a lot of variety out there.
Well, listen, this has been interesting and I hope informative for a lot of people. I can't thank you enough for doing it. Does anybody have any final words?
We're all in this together, and we're happy to provide good content for Jim, and we appreciate the fact that Jim is willing and able to give us an audience. We have a scale that we need more exposure to. We think this is a great way to get it. We appreciate the opportunity.
Fantastic.
I also think we should support those who are doing O-scale kits and O-scale models. If we don't do that, they won't continue to do it. That's the big problem. Just to
And
support
they need a way to communicate.
That's right.
Because so many of the small manufacturers that like Alan Rogers, who's doing the church and so forth, you know, if they go to trade shows, it's local. You know, there's a local market for them. They don't get exposure. They come on a show like this, they get exposure all over. But there needs to be exposure somehow, that if we're going to encourage the mom and pop, and if the mom and pop is critical for the future of this scale, then there's got to be a way that we can provide them exposure and a market capability, because they can't do it the normal ways.
Well, and they have to put in all the work themselves. You know, we have a section in our magazine every other month for new products, and we don't charge for that. And I'm sure that O-Scale Trains has the same type of thing. If you send them a press release with a picture or something, they'll print it, we'll print it. You know, I can't go out looking for all these people. That's really not my job. It's their job to give me that information. But we've always plugged anybody who sends us, you know, press releases and pictures of new kits. There's no charge for that. We'd love to have them as an advertiser, but a lot of these guys can't afford that. Well, that's one way we can push them, and the other magazine can push them too. But they got to do that, and that's the difficult part, is getting them to do that.
Let me jump in here for a second. Dan's pretty much nailed that pretty tightly. I mean, it's free in O-Scale Trains for product announcements, and getting information from people for product announcements. We're sitting around waiting for it. You know, we're not chasing after them, though I have to admit, sometimes I do chase after them and I still don't get anything. So it's, you know, these smaller vendors of kits, or products, whatever they are, that are useful for our hobby. A lot of them, I'd say it's a 50-50 chance when after I talk to someone at a show that they'll actually follow up and send me the information and a photo. It's as if they just can't be bothered, and it's frustrating, because we're trying to give them a free half a page of info, you know, to help them and support them. So
I sent a kit to Martin for review
Yes.
from the things that I do. He did not only a great job building it, but did a great job describing it, and then donated it as a fundraiser for one of the O-Scale shows at the end. So it was a win-win-win, and I really appreciate what Martin has done in that regard, not just with me, but with a lot of people.
Yeah, and I try to support the vendors that are in part doing my builds with this show as well. You know, we try to, Dan and I both try to support vendors as best we can, but they have to meet us in the middle somewhere.
Well, you know, because I deal with a lot of the small manufacturers, I get them to come on my show. I write about them in my articles and so forth. It's not an easy thing. I mean, you know, I think part of it is they're not business people. Many of them are not in this as a full-time business or there to make a profit. They're in it as a hobby, and they're so overwhelmed with getting the product designed and printed and boxed and shipped and all the rest of it, and go through all of the hoopla, that advertising and promotion takes a back seat. And that's what I find in a lot of cases. I found that when I tried to do digital train shows with the small manufacturers. I find it when I try to get people to come on the show and build their kits. I find it when I try to get them to want to be written about in my articles. So I don't know what the solution is, but I know there's got to be a solution here somehow. And I'll do anything I can on this show to try to encourage them to get you all the information for the magazines. If it's free, why wouldn't they do it? It just doesn't take that much effort, it doesn't seem to me. Now, that's because I write a lot. I do a lot of that kind of stuff, and for a person who isn't that familiar with it, it may be an overwhelming problem. So how can that be helped? I mean,
Daryl here with Interaction Hobbies. It's a really interesting discussion. I'm glad this is happening. And the one thing I've noticed, I mean, this is a full-time business for us. And if you look at our statistics in our business, 90% of it is HO, probably 5 or 6% O scale, and then the rest N scale. And we do a fair amount of O and HO. But the thing that we find is there's such a huge demand in the HO side to cover that. How do you need to explore the possibilities in O scale as well. But if I look at the same offerings that I have in HO that I want to put out in O scale, I mean, to put out an O scale kit is just like it's 4 times the volume of HO. It's a fair amount of work to do it right. I don't just take an HO scale kit and scale it up. It's basically a redesign so it doesn't look toy when you scale it up from HO. So there's a lot of work that goes into that, and trying to look at the response back. And I've tried to look at the O scale, S scalers as well, and very, very good people. As far as I'm concerned, the O scale guys are the least of the whininess. if you look at it that way, they're the most grateful people when we do something, which we appreciate too, and it's always good feedback from the magazines and the builders. But I think if there's a different way to work with the smaller scales, because I'm not quite sure which kits we should take. We should scale them all up, but does everybody need a 1950s gas station in O scale, or would they rather have a tobacco shop from the turn of the century? And you can't do it all, and there's a splinter group at both ends of those scales. So I've often wondered if there's I want to say not GoFundMe, but crowdsourcing way of doing things. If we can get enough interest in a kit to develop it, we'll do it. If I know there's 20 kits out there to be sold, I'll make a run. But
why don't you email Dan Dawdy and get a dialogue going with him, because that's the kind of thing that he would be really good at thinking through and figuring out how to get it into the magazine in a way to get some feedback for you.
Yeah, well, it's definitely the magazine advertising. We spend a lot of money on advertising. I think I've been trying to get back to O scale resources and get some advertising going with them as well. But we're an O scale magazine, and but again, it's that not get exposure for the one kit. It's what needs to get produced. And I've talked to a lot of the other manufacturers who dabble in O scale. There's a lot of O scale manufacturers directly, but the majority of us structured guys, we're in HO, and that's where the market is. So it's always like, for you guys, it's pulling hen's teeth to get us to scale something up. And the feedback is we're never quite sure. You can pick a winner of a kit, and suddenly there's 200 of them go off the shelf, and you pick another one that you spent 4 months on developing, and it's still sitting there. So it's kind of a crapshoot from the market, or from I like watching these types of groups, because you kind of get to see the layouts and go, okay, that's the type of structure they're going to do or want. But that takes a tremendous amount of time to try to spread that into other groups. And sorry there, Pat, my camera's broken, so you don't want to see me tonight. That's why I'm not turning it on. It's not that I'm ashamed, it's just not functional.
Well, I don't have a solution for you tonight, but I do think this is a discussion that needs to be continued, because I do see the problem out there. I hear about it from the manufacturers every time I talk to one. All of them are saying basically the same kinds of things, and nobody seems to have an answer for it. I know that I know the issue is out there. It's almost to a point where nobody wants to take a shot at trying to solve it. I don't know why that is, but it's just an insurmountable problem almost. People talk about it and then it's just dismissed. And I think the more we talk about it, maybe we'll come up with a solution. At least I hope so, because I know that the problem exists. Well, thank you guys so much for being here. I don't want to carry this on too far, but thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. I think you've opened a lot of people's eyes about O-scale. At least I certainly hope you have. That's what this has been about. And thank you so much again.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
One last quick comment.
Go ahead.
I just want to say O-scale, I'm moving into O-scale myself, into ON30. But the reason I like O-scale that I didn't hear discussed too much was the fact that O-scale, you can model character so much better than HO or any other scale. You know what I mean? So you get character in the figures and scenes and things that you don't necessarily get in HO at an individual level.
Or it's
Good
hard
point.
to detail as much too.
Yeah, and obviously the detail is there, but it's that character, that feeling that you get when you go look at an O-scale layout.
Listen, let me ask you a question before you get away tonight. I'd really like to continue this discussion with you. And if you're interested, I'd like to do a special segment on one of the shows coming up and see if we can continue this kind of a discussion about trying to figure out a way for small manufacturers. If you'd be interested in that.
Yeah, I certainly would. And I might be able to, if you're interested, I could probably I won't speak for them, but maybe one or two of the other manufacturers to have the same thoughts if you're interested.
I love it. And maybe we could get a panel going and see what would come out of it. If you'd be interested in doing that with me.
Sure, absolutely, Tim.
Fantastic. You got my email, right?
Yep.
If you'll send me an email, then maybe we can put it together.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And guys, thanks again so much for being here this evening. I'm sorry we went a little long, maybe got off track a little bit, but I do so much appreciate all your confidence and comments about O-scale today.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, that's basically our show tonight. I hope you've enjoyed it. Most importantly, I hope you've learned something. And now I'd like to go to a segment that we just started on our shows called The Caboose. So Phil, if you could explain what this is maybe and run the video.
You're muted, Jim, or Phil.
Certainly, Jim. So this is a promotion video that John Mack sent us for the Pacific Southwest Region Convention, which is in June next year. And it's going to be up in Flagstaff. So the good news is in Flagstaff in June, its weather's quite temperate, so it's a great place to go. So I'm going to go ahead and just run the video and shut up. So I think the dates are June 7th to 11th. But I'll put a link to the website up in the chat. So something fun to do next year. Of course, now I'm not going to find it where I thought it was. Hang on.
Well, I know it's there. You had it earlier.
Yeah, I had it earlier. Oh, there it is. I'm sorry. Can't read anymore.
All aboard! The Arizona Division of the Pacific Southwest region of the NMRA is proud to host the 2023 Regional Convention in Flagstaff, Arizona. You don't want to miss this one. Grab your tickets now. It's live steam to the Grand Canyon. There are a limited number of tickets available for this exclusive train. They're sure to sell out fast. Don't get left at the station. You can ride the Grand Canyon Special to one of the 7 natural wonders of the world, the Grand Canyon. On your way to Flagstaff, you might want to stop and view some of the model railroads on display in the Phoenix area and other sites. These are just some of the wonderful things to enjoy as you head up to the Drury Inn, located amongst the cool pines of northern Arizona. Why don't you join the gang at the hotel's kickback? Enjoy the fabulous appetizer buffet, complete with complimentary drinks. Don't forget to say hello to our hobo and grab some pins to swap. If you're not already full, you can grab a quick dinner before headed over to this ice cream social at the nearby 1899 Bar and Grill. After a busy day, you can relax in luxury at the Drury Inn, wind down by the fireplace, have a soak in the hot tub, or a quick dip in the pool. Ready to retire to your room? Enjoy your comfy bed, catch up on email with free Wi-Fi, or check out the latest on television.
Well, and Jim, we're back to you.
Well, thanks so much for everybody being here this evening. Like I say, I hope you enjoyed the show. Most importantly, I hope you learned something. If you'd like to come back and get the login links to our Zoom show, all you need to do is subscribe to our website, newtracksmodeling.com. If you'd rather watch our shows on YouTube, our YouTube channel is New Tracks Modeling. And please don't forget our scholarship program. And I hope that you'll consider a donation to us to help us fund the scholarship this year and get that program off the ground. Our Patreon account is New Tracks Modeling, and look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. Great modeling till then.